My true story from Kentucky. My son forbade me to attend my husband's funeral, but when my lawyer read the will, every head turned toward me. They tried to erase me. He made sure they couldn't. Sometimes I wait for some words from my family. But now, the message my daughter-in-law sent me erases everything. Dad used to love you. He doesn't anymore. Please don't insert yourself into a place you're no longer welcome. You made Dad suffer his whole life. Let him have peace without you disturbing it. That was the message my daughter-in-law sent me. No greeting, no warmth, just that. Along with a photo of the funeral invitation, my name slashed through with red ink as if I had been erased not only from their lives, but from his death too. I stared at the screen, the words swimming through my vision, unable to blink. My fingers trembled, not with anger, but with disbelief. I had half a mind to think it was a cruel mistake, but deep down I knew better. The silence over the past few months, the lack of updates as his health declined, the fact that I found out about his passing through a friend of a friend, it all pointed to this. They wanted to bury him without me, to pretend I was never part of his story. I pressed my phone to my chest and took a deep breath. I had every right to be at his funeral. We were never legally divorced. I had cared for that man for most of my life, stood by him when he had nothing, built a home with him from scratch, and yes, in the end, he had moved on. Moved out, but I never stopped being his wife. They could take away my place at the ceremony, but they could not take away my history with him. I still bought the flowers, white chrysanthemums. They were his favorite. I remember planting them in our front yard the year we bought our first house. He called them the quiet ones because they bloomed without bragging, just like I used to. I put on the gray dress he always liked, the one with the lace sleeves that made me feel younger than I was. I tied a scarf over my hair, the way I used to when we went to church together. I knew I would not be welcome, but I could not let him go without at least trying to say goodbye. When I arrived at the cemetery, the sky was dull and overcast. The air held that damp chill you only feel during early spring in Kentucky, the kind that seeps into your bones. I walked slowly toward the crowd, gathered near the casket, holding my bouquet close like a shield. I stayed near the back at first, quiet. Head bowed. I did not want to cause a scene. I just wanted a moment. That moment never came. From the corner of my eye, I saw her approaching my youngest daughter, the one who used to braid her doll's hair beside me while I cooked dinner. Now her face was cold, lips thin, eyes sharp. She walked right up to me without hesitation, her voice low but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I looked at her and tried to smile. "I came to pay my respects, that's all." She shook her head. "No, you don't belong here. Not today. This is our goodbye. Yours should have happened a long time ago." I stepped forward, holding out the flowers. "Please, I just want to lay these down, then I'll leave." "No." She blocked me with her body. "You made Dad suffer his whole life. Let him have peace without you disturbing it." I didn't have the strength to argue. I didn't have the voice. I looked around. No one intervened. Not my son who stood near the casket with his wife. Not my nieces who used to call me their second mother. Not even the pastor who glanced at me and quickly looked away. I reached out once more, hoping just to place the flowers near the edge of the service. My daughter slapped my hand aside and the bouquet fell to the ground. White petals scattered across the dirt, crushed beneath the heel of someone else's shoe. I froze. The sound of the petals breaking was louder than the murmurs that followed. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered. "That was her, right? The wife?" But I couldn't answer. My chest was tight. My eyes were dry. There were no tears left to cry, only a deep hollow ache that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I bent slowly, knees shaking, and gathered what I could of the flowers. The stems were bent, the blooms bruised, but I held them like they were the only things tethering me to the ground. "Go," my daughter said, "before embarrass yourself any further." I turned away without another word. My shoes sank slightly into the grass with each step, the weight of everything I had endured, pressing harder with every inch. As I reached the gates of the cemetery, I looked back one last time. The man I loved was being lowered into the earth, and I was watching from behind a wrought iron fence. Like a stranger, like a mistake, like a ghost. They had erased me from the invitations, from the memories, from the farewell. But I knew one thing for certain. He was not finished speaking. Not yet. We were married for 42 years. The first 20 were beautiful. He was kind, patient, gentle with his words. He'd leave notes in my coat pocket during the winter, little scribbles of love or jokes only we understood. He used to hum while mowing the lawn, whistle when he cooked eggs, and hold my hand under the table when our children were too rowdy during dinner. He loved me the way a man should love a woman, with softness, with pride, with time. We built everything together, not just the house, but the life. I was there when he opened his first business, a modest construction firm that barely survived its first year. I kept the books, made the calls, even delivered blueprints in the rain when he forgot them. I raised our children while he worked late, made every birthday cake from scratch, and ironed his shirts for every client meeting. But success does something to some men. It does not turn them cruel. It makes them forget where they came from. When his firm expanded, when the contracts grew, when people began to say his name with respect, he changed slowly. At first, a forgotten thank you here, a late night that became a weekend trip there. The briefcases got newer, the phone calls became secretive, and then one day, he simply stopped coming home for dinner. I knew about her long before he admitted it. She was younger, with the kind of laugh that made men think they were still boys. She met him at a networking event and knew how to play the part. I was told she was harmless at first, just a consultant, just a friend. But wives know. We always know. I could smell her perfume on his coat long before I found her earrings under our couch cushion. Still, I stayed. Not because I was weak, not because I did not know my worth. I stayed because we had children, because they loved their father, because I believed that a broken marriage would leave scars far worse than a hollow one. And perhaps foolishly, I thought he might return to me if I just stayed long enough, so I kept my place. I cooked for him, even when he stopped showing up to eat. I washed his laundry, even when his new place surely had someone else doing it. I smiled at the children and told them everything was fine. I became invisible in my own home, but at least the children did not have to see the crack. There were nights, more than I cared to admit, when I would sit in the basement, yarn in my lap, knitting with trembling fingers. Above me, I would hear them, the woman's laugh, his footsteps, their voices rising and falling in the bedroom we once shared. I never cried in front of them, never once. But I cried into blankets that were never warm enough, into the walls that had seen better versions of us. He moved out eventually, bought her a place, took my son to dinner, gave her the smile he once gave me, and still I didn't file for divorce. Maybe I should have. But there was a part of me that believed something sacred still existed between us. Something time had not touched. When he fell ill, I found out through someone else. Cancer, aggressive, fast, the kind that does not wait for apologies. I went to the hospital once, just once. They would not let me in. His new family said I would upset him, that he did not want to see me, that he was too tired, too weak, too close to the end. I stood in the hallway for 2 hours with a container of soup he used to love. The nurse apologized, but gently with pity in her eyes. I left the soup at the front desk and never returned. Weeks passed. I waited. I lit candles. I prayed. I checked the paper every morning, fearing the worst, but hoping for a chance. Then came the message. Not a call, not a visit, just a text. He's gone. Funeral's next week. This has nothing to do with you. That was it. 12 words. 12 words to end a lifetime. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, reading those words over and over, my hands resting on the wood we had picked out together. The sun had just come up. The light made everything look colder. There was no obituary with my name, no mention of beloved wife, no invitation to grieve. They had cut me out completely. And just like that, I was a ghost in my own story. They erased me. They erased my decades of loyalty, of service, of silence. But grief has a way of clarifying things, and pain, when held long enough, sharpens into purpose. They may have buried him without me, but I knew his story with me was not finished. He had not had the last word, and neither had I. The morning of the funeral, I woke before the sun. I ironed the gray dress he used to love, the one with the pearl buttons and soft neckline. He once told me it made me look like I belonged on the cover of a book. I hadn't worn it in years, but I'd kept it clean, folded, and waiting. Like part of me always knew there would be one last time. I brushed my hair and tied it back with a ribbon he gave me on our 30th anniversary. Blue silk, slightly frayed now. My hands trembled slightly as I clipped on the earrings he brought home from his first out-of-state job. I did not do it for vanity. I did it because I wanted to walk in that cemetery with my history intact, even if no one else there would acknowledge it. I wanted to feel like his wife one more time. At the florist, I asked for white chrysanthemums, fresh, full-stemmed. I told them not to add anything artificial. No ribbons, no colored paper, just the flowers, just the truth. I took a cab to the cemetery, holding the bouquet gently in my lap the whole way, like it might break from anything more than a whisper. When we turned onto the long gravel road, and I saw the canopy tent in the distance, the pit in my stomach grew, the chairs, the casket, the cluster of mourners in black, the minister flipping through notes. I told the driver to stop a little before the entrance. I wanted to walk the last part on my own. I stepped carefully, every crunch of gravel beneath my shoes, sounding louder than it should have. The flowers pressed close to my chest, my breath shallow. I made it to the gate before the man in the security jacket raised his hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask your name." I blinked. "Molly Ellis?" He looked down at a clipboard, then back up. His voice was flat. "You're not on the list. I'm sorry. This is a private ceremony. I'm his wife," I said quietly. He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "You'll need to speak to the family directly." Just then, I saw her, my daughter-in-law, walking toward us. She was wearing a tight black dress, heels too high for a cemetery, and that permanent look of polite cruelty she had perfected over the years. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. She smiled, a closed-mouthed smirk more than anything warm. "Molly," she said almost cheerfully, "you weren't supposed to come." I steadied my voice. "I don't want to make a scene. I just want to lay these flowers down and say goodbye." "You had your chance for goodbyes years ago," she said. "Now this is our day. Please don't make it uncomfortable for everyone." "I was married to him for 40 years, I whispered. "And divorced and everything but paperwork," she snapped. "You're not part of this anymore." My chest tightened. "You're the past, Lomi. You're the past, Molly. We're the family now." She glanced at the security guard. "Make sure she doesn't get through." I turned then and saw my granddaughter, my oldest son's girl, standing with a group of cousins by the chairs. She looked like me when I was her age. Same eyes, same long arms. I raised the bouquet gently and tried to catch her attention. She looked at me, then looked away, turned her back. It was like being struck quietly. I stood there, still as stone, gripping the stems too tightly. I heard the music start, the hymn he used to hum in the car. The ceremony began, and I stood outside the gates. I watched them read the eulogy from a distance, every word floating past me like I didn't deserve to hear it. The chairs were full of strangers and half-family, people who hadn't known him when he still ate peanut butter toast in his pajamas or danced with me in the kitchen on Sundays. I stepped closer to the fence. I just wanted to place the flowers against the stone. Just that. I moved forward slowly, heart pounding. Another figure came toward me. My daughter, the youngest, cold as the morning air. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice sharp. "I'm trying to say goodbye. This is not your place," she hissed. "Might have been once, but not anymore. Go home, Mom. Don't embarrass yourself. I raised you in his house," I said, voice shaking. "I tucked you into bed while he worked late. I braided your hair, paid for your braces. You think I wasn't part of his life?" She looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. "You made Dad miserable," she said, each word like a blade. "Now let him rest without your guilt hovering over him." She knocked my hand aside. The bouquet slipped from my fingers. It hit the ground. The petals scattered, stems broken, leaves torn. Some rolled under the security guard's boot. No one moved. No one offered to help. No one gasped. It was like watching a glass shatter in a silent room. I knelt slowly, knees screaming, and picked up what I could, one stem at a time. The wind was cold, and my hands were shaking. Not from age, from something else. Something like shame, but heavier. A shame I didn't deserve, but still felt. No one spoke to me. No one stopped me. They just let me walk away with my ruined bouquet. I stood just outside the gate as the casket was lowered. I said nothing, but in my heart I spoke everything I had never been allowed to say. And I made a promise then and there. They would not bury me with him. They would not bury the truth. Not yet. The call came 2 days after the funeral. I was still unpacking the suitcase I had brought back untouched. Same gray dress, same ribbon, same crumpled flowers now dried and lifeless. The house was too quiet. No one called, no one checked in. My phone had become a paperweight until it buzzed once with a number I hadn't seen in years. "Molly," a woman's voice said, hesitant. "It's Joyce from Mount Olive." I blinked, barely recognizing the name until her soft southern lilt anchored me back to old Sunday mornings and choir rehearsals. Joyce had been a friend back when I still had some. Joyce, I breathed, is everything all right? There was a pause. Then she asked carefully, did you know that Charles's lawyer is looking for you? I froze. I thought you should know, she added. He called the church office, said your name was on something important. I thanked her, hung up, then sat still for nearly an hour. My hands were cold as I pulled out my old email account, the one I barely checked. There it was. A message from someone named Robert L. Tate, Esquire. Subject regarding the estate of Charles Ellis. Message. Mrs. Ellis, I have been appointed as the private legal representative for your husband's estate. Per his final instructions, you are listed as the designated beneficiary and are requested to attend the reading of the will. Please respond for travel arrangements. Sincerely, R. L. Tate. I read it 3 times before I could breathe again. A private will. He had made one. Without them, without the new family, without the woman who locked me out of the hospital room, without the children who had pushed me from the gates. He had written a will, and he had left it with someone outside their reach. I sat at my table in silence, one hand over my chest. He remembered me. Even after everything, he remembered. 2 days later, I boarded a flight to Kentucky. I told no one. Not the kids, not the neighbors, not Joyce. I packed a small bag and left a note for the neighbor to feed my cat. That was it. I landed on a gray morning. The air smelled like rain and old soil. I rented a car and drove through town slowly, passing places I had not seen in decades. The diner where we used to eat pie after Sunday service. The hardware store where he bought me a garden spade for Mother's Day. The courthouse where we registered our marriage license. Everything had aged like me, a little worn but still standing. Before I went to the law office, I made one stop, a small thrift store just off Main Street. I found a dress almost identical to the one I wore the day we were married, cream-colored with tiny buttons up the front and lace at the sleeves. It wasn't fancy, but it felt right. He married me when I wore something like this, and he remembered me when no one else did. I arrived at the law office just before noon. The building was old brick with green shutters and a white sign that simply read, Tatton Sons. There was no receptionist, just a bell on the door and the sound of voices down the hall. I followed them quietly. I stopped just outside the conference room. The door was open an inch. Inside, I saw her, my daughter-in-law, flanked by my son and daughter. They were seated at the long table, already leaning forward, already asking questions. I heard her say something sharp, something about making sure the assets are distributed fairly. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open and stepped in. All 3 of them turned, and for the first time in years, their mouths stopped moving. I walked in slowly, the dress light against my skin, my bag over one shoulder. The attorney stood up, his eyes wide with recognition. Mrs. Ellis, he said warmly, we've been waiting for you. I pulled out my chair and sat at the head of the table. Not a word from them, not a sound. Every head turned toward me. For the first time in years, they remembered who I was. The room had fallen into a silence so deep I could hear the clock ticking on the far wall. My children, my flesh and blood, sat across the table with their eyes fixed on the polished oak, suddenly too heavy to lift their heads. My daughter-in-law had gone pale, her mouth slightly parted in disbelief. She looked like she was waiting for someone to stop the moment to shout, "This is a mistake," to pull the rug back before it unraveled completely, but no one moved. The attorney, Mr. Tate, cleared his throat. He reached into a small briefcase beside him and removed a sleek black laptop. There is a message, he said, looking directly at me and only me, recorded 2 weeks before Mr. Ellis passed under full legal advisement and with medical clarity confirmed by hospital staff. This was meant to be viewed only in the presence of all legal heirs. He clicked a few keys and the screen flickered to life, and then he appeared. My husband Charles. He was thinner than I remembered, pale, frail. The hospital gown hung on him like it belonged to someone else. Tubes snaked into his arms. His eyes were sunken but sharp. But his voice, it was strong. He looked into the camera and began, "If you're watching this, I'm gone. And if you're watching this together, then I need to tell you something before the rest of this gets read." He paused, blinked, took a slow breath. I spent the last years of my life being foolish. I chose pride over love, comfort over loyalty, and in doing so, I wronged the one person who stood by me the longest. Molly. He said my name with such softness, I forgot for a moment that we were surrounded by witnesses. I was a fool. I thought I needed something new. But when sickness came, when silence filled the nights, all I wanted was her voice, her quiet steadiness, her forgiveness. And somehow she gave it to me, even when I didn't deserve it. My fingers curled gently around the dried bouquet in my lap. Petals flaked into my palm, but I did not let go. To my children, he continued, and here his tone changed. You have grown into strong people, capable, ambitious. But I saw what you became in the way you treated your mother. You shut her out, you erased her, and for that, you are not entitled to what she built alongside me. My daughter gasped, barely audible. He leaned forward slightly as if drawing closer to the lens. I leave everything to Molly. The house, the company shares, the retirement accounts, and the farm. Because if anyone deserves to carry the name Ellis forward, it's the woman who never tried to destroy it. And if you, any of you, tried to keep her from saying goodbye to me, then may this be your last time sitting at this table as though you've earned it. He sat back. I loved her once, and I forgot. But I remember now. Goodbye. The screen went dark. No music, no dramatic cut. Just the quiet finality of a man who knew he was dying and chose in the end to tell the truth. I looked down at the flowers in my lap, crushed, dry, but still intact. No one spoke. My son shifted in his chair, ran a hand down his face, then dropped his head like it weighed too much. My daughter blinked rapidly, fighting something behind her eyes, but she said nothing. My daughter-in-law clenched her jaw so tightly it trembled. Mr. Tate folded the laptop and gently cleared his throat again. Per the recording and the legally binding documents filed with the probate court, all assets listed in the estate are transferred solely to Mrs. Molly Ellis with no contest permitted. He paused. Are there any questions? Not a single voice answered. I sat still. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because every head in that room, every person who had turned me away, who had whispered behind my back, who had locked doors and scribbled out my name, was now turning to look at me, and not a single one could meet my eyes. In the weeks that followed the reading of the will, my world transformed, but not in the way people imagine when they hear the word inheritance. Yes, I became the legal owner of Ellis Contracting Group, a mid-sized construction company with state contracts and a few private developments still in progress. Yes, I took over 3 rental properties, 2 in town, 1 in Lexington, and the quiet little farm on the outskirts of Bowling Green, where we used to dream of retiring. But it wasn't wealth that changed me. It was the silence from the ones who had once shouted me down. Not a single phone call came from my son. Not a word from my daughter. My grandchildren, raised under cold ceilings and colder truths, stayed quiet, likely confused by the storm circling their home. I didn't reach out. I wasn't angry. I was clean, emptied of hope, but filled with something far sturdier. Peace. Then came the letter from Mr. Tate. Please see attached documentation recently submitted to the estate regarding misconduct by relevant parties. Attached were photos, dozens of them, taken from different angles, different nights, some outside hotels, some in restaurants, all time-stamped. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. My husband's new wife was in each one, sometimes with her arm draped around a man, sometimes entering a hotel lobby, sometimes laughing across a bar. The man, my son, my firstborn, the one who had blocked me at the cemetery gate. At first, I thought the photos were doctor-read, some elaborate smear. But then came the letter, unsigned, anonymous, mailed directly to Mr. Tate's office. They thought no one knew. They'd been seeing each other since before Charles got sick. It started on a work trip to Atlanta. Everyone on the inside knew, but no one dared say anything. Now that he's dead, let the truth come out. It hit me like a hammer. Not just the betrayal of my son, but the way it twisted everything I'd tried to hold together. They hadn't just excluded me. They had desecrated the very thing they claimed I didn't deserve to grieve. Mr. Tate, ever the professional, said he would forward the information to the appropriate authorities for ethics review and begin immediate dissolution of any financial entanglements between the company and those two. Before I could even process the shock, the next explosion came. The hospital report showed up on my desk 3 days later. The new wife had been admitted with multiple facial injuries, a shattered cheekbone, a fractured wrist. The police report listed the assailant. My daughter-in-law, she had found out somehow, some way. Maybe she saw the photos. Maybe she heard a whisper from someone who couldn't keep the secret anymore. What matters is that she walked into that woman's boutique store in downtown Louisville and beat her so badly she was unconscious when the ambulance arrived. There were witnesses, there were cameras. She was arrested on the spot. The news spread like wildfire. Local papers picked it up first, then the blogs, then social media. The headlines were brutal. Heir of Ellis contracting caught in affair with father's widow. Brawl between widow and daughter-in-law leaves one hospitalized, one in jail. Small town scandal. What really happened behind Charles Ellis's legacy? I didn't need to lift a finger. The town that had once gossiped about poor Molly left behind like an old coat now turned its gaze on them with all the judgment and ridicule they had once aimed at me. The school board launched a review of my son's status as PTA chair. The church quietly removed his family from the community events list. Parents at the school whispered. The children came home crying. He lost custody of his youngest daughter after the Department of Family Services opened an emergency case. They cited domestic instability and unresolved trauma in the household. His world collapsed in slow public motion. And me, I stayed silent. I did not speak to reporters. I did not answer my phone. I tended to the farm. I took walks along the pond. I planted chrysanthemums in the soil he once promised me. The air was cleaner out there, easier to breathe. The day they sentenced my daughter-in-law, 6 months of jail time, followed by anger management and community service, I received a letter in the mail from my son. Just one line. Are you happy now? I read it, folded it neatly, and placed it into the fire. Because here's the truth he'll never understand. This was never about revenge. It was about restoration. He and the others had broken something sacred, and Charles in the end had tried to mend it the only way he could. By giving me back the voice they tried to silence. They thought they had power, but what they had was leverage, and leverage only works when someone stays quiet. I was done being quiet. People thought I would run the company, that I would step into the big corner office, wear tailored suits, learn the language of contractors and city permits, and continue the legacy he left behind. But that legacy had never truly belonged to me. It was built without my name on the walls, without my hands on the payroll, without my seat at the meetings. I had held his household, not his briefcase. I had raised his children, not managed his projects, and I had no desire to pour the rest of my years into maintaining something that once erased me. So, I did the only thing that felt true. I shut it all down. I met with the board of directors. I let the staff go respectfully with severance and references. And I sold the remaining contracts to a smaller firm in Lexington, run by a woman who built her company from nothing but grit and debt. I sold the corporate properties, liquidated the investments, every asset, every account, every nameplate. Then I built something new. I called it the Last Word Foundation. A small, tightly run nonprofit designed to help older women who had been discarded by husbands, children, churches, communities, women like me, women who had given everything and been thanked with silence. We offered legal assistance, temporary housing, emotional counseling, dignity. I made sure it was quiet, not flashy. We didn't need to scream, we just needed to exist. And then there was the farm, the little property on the edge of Bowling Green, where we once dreamed of retiring. He wanted cows, I wanted chickens. We settled on wildflowers, but dreams fade when betrayal moves in. Still, when I stepped onto that land again, I felt something different. I felt space. I felt air. I turned the house into a refuge, not a retirement home, not a care facility, a refuge, a place where women in their 60s, 70s, 80s could come to rest, to reset, to remember themselves. We added 6 beds, a kitchen big enough for shared meals, a garden for anyone who wanted to put her hands in the dirt. No clocks, no judgment, just peace. I named it Stillhouse because after all the noise, all the shame, all the anger, stillness is holy. But there was one more thing I had to do. I organized a memorial. Not for him. Not exactly. For truth, for closure. We held it in the community center downtown. I didn't send formal invitations, no printed cards, no press release, just a quiet announcement in the local paper. A remembrance gathering for Charles Ellis and the life that once was. Hosted by Molly Ellis. All are welcome. I expected a few faces, maybe 10, maybe less. 200 people came. They filled every seat. They stood in the back. They brought casseroles and flowers and handwritten notes. Some of them hugged me like I had just come back from war. Others apologized through tears, saying they didn't know what had happened, that they had believed what they were told. But most said they came not for Charles, but for me. Because when a woman survives a story meant to erase her and chooses to speak, it stirs something in others. I didn't read a speech. I just stood at the front of the room and said, he was not a perfect man. I was not a perfect wife, but we shared a life, and I refused to let it be rewritten. The crowd was silent. Not out of discomfort, out of reverence. They listened to me, to the woman who once sat knitting beneath a bedroom filled with betrayal. To the woman who had her name crossed out in red, to the woman who now stood in front of them with nothing to prove but everything to say, and that more than any fortune was the legacy I chose to keep. The mornings are quiet here. The sun spills slow over the hills, kissing the wild grass and waking the garden with a kind of softness I never found in city walls or empty bedrooms. At Stillhouse, the coffee brews early. The porch cacks under the weight of memories being let go, and the women rise when they're ready, not when the world demands. We keep no clocks on the walls. Time, we've learned, is not something you owe anyone. I spend my days teaching what I know. I show them how to press their fingers into the soil just enough to tuck in seeds without smothering them. I teach them how to turn bruised apples into warm pies. I remind them how to laugh with their mouths open, not behind their hands. Some of the women here haven't spoken full sentences in years, but when they stand side by side, bare hands in dirt, laughing over crooked carrots or too salty soup, they come back to life. So do I. We share stories, not always, but in glances, in scars, in the way someone hesitates before walking through a door. There's strength in surviving what was meant to break you, but there's something holier in choosing joy after. One afternoon, while pulling weeds by the fence, I felt a tug on the back of my cardigan. It was Amelia, 10 years old, big eyes, always watching. Her mother arrived last month with nothing but a duffel bag and a bruise that hadn't yet faded. She hadn't said much, just asked if there was room. We made room, we always do. Amelia had been quiet at first, always clutching a stuffed bear, missing one eye, always looking for corners to disappear into. But that day, she stood beside me, barefoot in the grass, hands smeared with soil. She tilted her head and asked, "Miss Molly, do you think anyone can start over?" I paused, wiped my palms on my apron. Kneeling beside her, I looked into that face. The kind still soft enough to hope, but old enough to have seen the worst. "Yes," I said. "But only if you're willing to leave the places that tried to erase you." She blinked, then nodded. And just like that, something shifted in her, in me, maybe in the whole world. That night, I sat on the porch after everyone went to bed. The wind whispered through the trees. The stars blinked, shy and scattered. I opened my journal, the one I started the day after the funeral, the day I chose not to disappear, and I wrote, "I do not need to be forgiven. I only need to live without being crossed out of my own life." Then I closed the book, not to end the story, but because I had finally reached the page where silence no longer meant defeat. Out here, in the place where I was once forgotten, I became unforgettable. And that is what freedom looks like for the woman they tried to erase. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt discarded, silenced, or told you no longer mattered, know this: you are not alone. And you are not finished. They tried to cross me out of my own life, but I picked up the pen and wrote myself back in here. We don't whisper what they did to us. We remember, we rebuild, and we tell the truth, because sometimes that's the most powerful revenge of all. Click subscribe and join me next time for another true story they never saw coming. Until then, stay strong, stay kind, and never let them write your ending for